My name is Carol Peterson, I'm 72 years old, and my son's fiancée told him she was too embarrassed by my job as a waitress to have me at their wedding. Before I tell you how I canceled the entire $80,000 event I paid for, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It all happened on a perfect Texas May afternoon, the kind where the air smells of freshly cut grass and looming thunderstorms. Tomorrow was supposed to be the proudest day of my life. My only son, Michael, was getting married. I was in my backyard, the one I tended to for over 40 years, doing the one thing that always calmed my nerves, tending to my roses. These weren't just any roses. They were my prize winners, deep crimson blooms that Tiffany, my son's fiancée, had insisted on having for the wedding decorations. "Oh, Carol, they're just divine," she'd said. "They'll add such a personal touch." So there I was, carefully snipping the best blooms, humming a little tune, feeling the warm sun on my back. The kitchen window, which overlooked the garden, was wide open. Michael was in there on the phone with Tiffany. I could hear the low murmur of his voice and I smiled. He sounded so happy. I leaned over to cut a particularly beautiful rose, and that's when I heard her voice, clearer this time, smaller and sharper than my son's, like chipping ice. "Michael, you have to do something about your mother," Tiffany said. There was no warmth in her tone. It was flat annoyed. "My parents are flying in from California. My father's a surgeon, my mother's a lawyer. All their friends, they're professionals. And your mother, she's just a waitress. I'm embarrassed, Michael. I truly am." The air went out of my lungs. I froze, the pruning shears hovering over a rosebud. My heart didn't just sink. It plummeted, crashing into the pit of my stomach. "Come on, Tiff, that's harsh." Michael's voice was weak, pleading. He wasn't defending me. He was trying to placate her. "Harsh? It's the truth," she snapped back. "Look at her hands, Michael. Have you seen them up close? They're rough and callous from all those years of serving people. What are my parents going to think? What will our guests think? It's going to ruin the whole aesthetic." A cold numbness spread through my fingers. My hands. She was talking about my hands. The same hands that had changed his diapers, that had held him when he had a fever, that had worked double shifts to put food on the table after his father passed. Then came the part that truly broke me. "Listen," Tiffany said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I have an idea. We'll just tell everyone she came down with a nasty flu. A really bad one. That way she doesn't have to come. It's perfect. No one will question it. It's for the best for everyone." A strangled sound escaped my throat, but I clamped my hand over my mouth before they could hear. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My own son was on the other end of that line, listening to this woman plot to erase me from the most important day of his life. And then Michael said nothing. His silence was his answer. It was a betrayal so deep it felt like a physical blow. As if that wasn't enough, Tiffany delivered the final crushing strike. "Besides," she said with a dismissive little laugh, "we have her money now. We've paid for everything. Her part is done. That's what really matters, isn't it?" The pruning shears fell from my numb hand. They clattered on the stone path, the sound echoing in the sudden, deafening silence. In that one moment my entire world, the one I had built for him brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, shattered into a million pieces. They weren't just ashamed of me. They had used me. I was nothing more than a bank account, an ATM that had finally run dry. I stared at the open window, at the house my late husband and I had bought, the house where I raised my son alone. And as I stared, a cold, hard resolve began to form where my heart used to be. They thought they were just talking about some old waitress. They thought I was a fragile old woman they could push around and discard when I was no longer useful. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. I didn't go back inside right away. I just stood there in the garden, the scent of roses suddenly cloying and sick, as the Texas sun beat down on my neck. That night sleep was a stranger. I sat in my small kitchen, the one where I'd made Michael thousands of meals, and I just stared at my hands under the dim light. Tiffany was right. They were rough. The knuckles were swollen from arthritis, the skin was a roadmap of tiny scars from burns and cuts, the nails were short and practical. They were the hands of a woman who had worked hard for 52 years. They were the hands that held my husband Frank's as he took his last breath in a cold hospital room, leaving me a widow at 35 with a 10-year-old boy to raise. After the funeral, when the casseroles stopped coming and the sympathetic whispers faded, it was just me and Michael and a mountain of bills. The Sunrise Diner became my second home. It wasn't a career, it was survival. I remember the smell of stale coffee and bacon grease that clung to my hair and clothes, a smell I could never quite wash out. I remember the endless stream of faces, some kind, some cruel, all demanding, "More coffee, hon? Where's my check? This is cold." I smiled through it all. Every single day. My life became a blur of double shifts and aching feet. I'd get home long after Michael was asleep, my body screaming in protest, and I'd tiptoe into his room just to watch him breathe. Then I'd be up before the sun, pulling on my tired uniform, to make him his favorite chocolate chip pancakes before school. He was my whole world, my reason for breathing. Every tip, every single quarter, dime, and nickel went into an old pickle jar I kept on top of the fridge. I called it Michael's future fund. At night, I'd sit at this very table and count the coins, stacking them into neat little towers. That clinking sound was the music of my life. It was the sound of new sneakers, of a field trip to the Science Museum, of a bicycle for his 12th birthday. It was the sound of a mother's love, measured out in loose change. I remember one Christmas he desperately wanted a video game console. Cost $200, which might as well have been $2 million to me. I took on extra holiday shifts, working Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, serving families who were celebrating together while my own boy was at home with a neighbor. When I finally walked in on Christmas night, exhausted and smelling of burnt turkey, and saw the look on his face as he unwrapped that box, it was worth every single ache, every lonely moment. I thought that's what being a mother was. You erase your own needs. You pour everything you have into your child, and their happiness becomes your own. Tiffany's words echoed in my head, a cruel counterpoint to these memories. She's just a waitress. Just as if those 52 years of backbreaking work were nothing. As if the life I had built for him from pancakes and pennies was something to be ashamed of. I looked at the pickle jar, which now sat empty on the shelf, a dusty relic. I had poured its entire contents, and then some, into his fancy education and his even fancier wedding. I had built a palace for my prince, but I never realized that he was ashamed of the woman who had laid every single stone. The truth was a bitter pill to swallow. I had given him the world, but I'd forgotten to teach him the value of the hands that had built it. And in doing so, I had created a monster who saw me not as his mother, but as a stepping stone he was now ready to kick away. Sitting there in the dark, the memories kept coming, each one a fresh stab of pain. It wasn't just the small things. It was the big sacrifices, the ones that had fundamentally altered the course of my own life, all for him. I remembered when he turned 16. More than anything, he wanted a car. Not a new one, just something to get around in, to have a taste of freedom. All his friends were getting cars for their 16th birthdays. I didn't have the kind of money for that. My old sedan was barely running as it was. So I sold my mother's jewelry. The simple gold locket she'd given me. The pearl earrings Frank had bought me for our 5th anniversary. I took them to a pawn shop, the bell above the door tinkling like a death knell for my past, and walked out with a few $100s. It still wasn't enough. I took a second job, cleaning offices at night after my shifts at the diner. For 6 months, my life was nothing but work and a few hours of fitful sleep. I'd scrub toilets and empty trash cans, my hands raw from the cleaning chemicals, imagining Michael's smile. And when I finally handed him the keys to that beat-up old Ford pickup, his smile was as bright as the Texas sun. He hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. "Thanks, Mom," he'd said. "You're the best." And for me that made it all worth it. Then came college. He got accepted into the University of Texas at Austin. I was so proud I thought my heart would burst. We went to the orientation, and as we walked through the beautiful campus, I saw the future stretching out before him, full of possibilities I'd never had. Then they handed us the tuition bill. It felt like a punch to the gut. The number was astronomical. There was no way my waitress salary could cover it. Michael's face fell. "It's okay, Mom," he said, trying to be brave. "I can just go to the community college here." I looked at my son, this brilliant, hopeful young man, and I refused to let a piece of paper stand in the way of his dreams. That night I made a decision. There was only one thing of real value I had left. This house. the home Frank and I had poured our hearts into. The next day, I walked into the bank and took out a second mortgage. The banker, a man half my age in a crisp suit, looked at me with pity. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Peterson?" he asked. I signed the papers without a second thought. That money became his college fund. For 4 years I scraped by. I patched my old uniforms, my shoes had holes in them, and my diet consisted mostly of the leftover soup from the diner. But every semester that tuition check cleared. Every time he called home, excited about a class or a professor, I knew I'd made the right choice. He graduated with honors. At his graduation ceremony, he threw his arms around me and whispered, "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom." I cried tears of pure joy and relief. I thought all my sacrifices had finally paid off. I thought I had given him a foundation, a launching pad into a better life. I never imagined that he would use that launching pad to fly so far away from me that he would look back and see the woman who fueled his entire journey as nothing more than an embarrassment. He was ashamed of the smell of bacon grease, but he'd never had a problem eating the meals it paid for. He was ashamed of my calloused hands, but he'd never refused the cash they'd counted out for him. That night, in my silent kitchen, I finally understood. I hadn't just given him an education. I had given him a sense of entitlement so vast that it had completely eclipsed any sense of gratitude. After college, Michael got a good job in finance. He met Tiffany at a corporate event. She was beautiful, polished, and came from a world I only saw in magazines. Her family lived in a wealthy enclave in California. Her father a surgeon, her mother a corporate lawyer. When Michael brought her home to meet me, I was nervous. I cleaned the house for a week, bought new placemats, and even tried a fancy recipe I found online. Tiffany was polite enough, but there was a distance in her eyes as she looked around my small, humble home. She complimented my garden, but I saw the way her gaze snagged on a crack in the plaster or a worn spot on the armchair. I was just so happy for Michael. He was in love. He was beaming. When they announced their engagement a year later, I was thrilled. My boy had found his person. But then the wedding planning began, and my world started to shrink. It wasn't a conversation. It was a series of declarations. Tiffany wanted a wedding at the most exclusive golf and country club in the county. She wanted a designer dress she'd seen in a magazine. She wanted a string quartet, an open bar with top-shelf liquor, and a 5-course meal for 200 guests. Michael came to me one evening looking sheepish. He sat right here at this kitchen table. "Mom," he started, twisting a napkin in his hands, "Tiff has her heart set on this dream wedding. Her parents are contributing, but, well, we're still short. A lot short." He couldn't even look me in the eye. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a budget. The final number at the bottom made me feel dizzy. $80,000. $80,000? I whispered. It was more money than I'd seen in my entire life. "I know it's a lot," he said quickly, "but it's so important to her family. It's about standards, Mom." Standards. My standards had been about keeping the lights on and food on the table. His were now about Vera Wang dresses and champagne fountains. I should have said no. I should have told him that was an obscene amount of money, that a marriage is about love, not a party. But I looked at my son's desperate face, and all I could see was the little boy who wanted a video game console. All I wanted was to give him what he wanted, to make him happy. There was one last thing I had. After Frank died, a small inheritance from his parents had allowed us to buy a small plot of land out by the lake. It was our dream. We were going to build a tiny cabin there, a place to retire, to fish and watch the sunset. It was the last piece of my future with Frank. It was my only safety net for my old age. Without a word, I went to my bedroom, retrieved the deed from my lockbox, and placed it on the table in front of him. "Sell it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Use the money for your wedding." He looked up, his eyes wide. For a second I thought I saw a flicker of guilt, of shame. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a wave of relief. He jumped up and hugged me. "Oh, Mom, thank you. You don't know what this means. Tiffany will be so happy. You're the best mom in the world." A week later, the land was sold. I wrote them a check for $80,000. I watched them plan their fantasy wedding, picking out floral arrangements that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. And I smiled, telling myself this was the final sacrifice, the one that would launch him into a life of happiness. Back in my garden, with Tiffany's cruel words still ringing in my ears, I finally saw the cold, hard truth. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was a transaction. I had paid for a service. I had provided the funds. And now that my part was done, I was no longer needed. I wasn't the mother of the groom. I was just the caterer. And they were ready to show me the back door. I didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. The hours ticked by on the old kitchen clock, each one a hammer blow against the silence. I didn't cry. The shock had burned all the tears out of me, leaving behind something cold and hard and heavy in my chest. It felt like a block of ice was forming around my heart. I thought about Frank. What would he have said? He was a proud man, a man of simple principles. He believed in hard work, honesty, and above all, respect. He would have been heartbroken, but he also wouldn't have stood for this. He would have never let anyone, not even his own son, treat me this way. As the first faint streaks of gray light appeared in the eastern sky, I got up from the kitchen table. My joints ached, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. I walked into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I saw a tired 72-year-old woman with lines on her face that told the story of a hard life. I saw the faint silvery tracks of old tears. But I also saw something else in my eyes. Flicker. A spark I hadn't seen in a long, long time. It was the spark of my own self-worth, buried for decades under layers of sacrifice and a mother's blind love. They thought I was just a waitress. They thought I was a pushover. An endless well of money and support with no needs or feelings of my own. They had mistaken my love for weakness. That was a mistake they were about to regret. I went to my closet and pulled out the dress I had planned to wear to the wedding. It was a simple, elegant navy blue dress, the most expensive piece of clothing I'd ever bought. I laid it on the bed, and next to it I placed the small, faded photo of Frank that I kept on my nightstand. "Well, Frank," I whispered to the picture, "it's time I made you proud." I made a fresh pot of coffee, the strongest I could brew. As I sat at the kitchen table, the sun now fully risen, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The rage and the pain were still there, simmering beneath the surface, but on top was a layer of absolute certainty. I knew exactly what I had to do. It wasn't about revenge. I wasn't a vengeful person. It was about something more fundamental. It was about dignity. It was about drawing a line in the sand and declaring that I, Carol Peterson, was a person who deserved respect. If my own son wouldn't give it to me, then I would demand it for myself. I opened the folder where I'd kept all the wedding documents. The contracts, the receipts, the proof of my $80,000 payment. Every piece of paper was a testament to their greed and my foolishness. I laid them out in a neat row on the table. The country club, the caterer, the florist, the band, the photographer. All bought and paid for by the embarrassing waitress. If you're watching this and you've ever been made to feel small, to feel like your sacrifices were invisible, then stay with me. Because this is the moment the story really begins. This is the moment I stopped being a doormat and started being a force to be reckoned with. The sun was up. The wedding was in just a few hours. And I picked up the phone. The phone felt cool and solid in my hand. My first call was the biggest one. The Oak Ridge Country Club. A cheerful young woman answered. "Oak Ridge, how may I help you?" "Good morning," I said, my voice steady and even. It surprised me how calm I sounded. "My name is Carol Peterson. I'm the mother of the groom for the Peterson-Maxwell wedding scheduled for this afternoon." "Oh yes, Mrs. Peterson. Good morning. It's going to be a beautiful day for a wedding." "There's been a change of plans," I said, cutting through her pleasantries. "The wedding is cancelled." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "See, cancelled? Ma'am, I don't understand. The wedding is in 6 hours. Everything is set up. The staff is already here." "I understand it's an inconvenience," I said, "but it is cancelled. As the person who paid for the entire event, I am exercising my right to cancel the contract. But the deposit is non-refundable. There will be cancellation fees, ma'am. The full amount." "I am aware," I said calmly. "Send me the final bill for any outstanding charges. It will be paid. But the event is not happening." I could hear her sputtering as I gently hung up the phone. One down. My fingers moved quickly, dialing the next number on my list. The florist. A woman named Beatrice who had gushed about Tiffany's exquisite taste. Beatrice, this is Carol Peterson. Carol. Darling. I was just putting the finishing touches on the centerpieces. They are breathtaking. Beatrice, I need you to stop all work on the Peterson-Maxwell wedding. It's been cancelled. What? Cancelled? But I have thousands of dollars worth of lilies and roses here. What am I supposed to do with them? Her voice was rising in panic. An idea came to me. Donate them, I said. Take them to the local nursing home and the children's hospital. Tell them it's an anonymous gift. At least some good should come out of this day. I hung up before she could argue. Next, the baker. A snooty man from the city who was creating a 6-tier cake that cost more than my first car. I gave him the same news. He huffed and puffed about his artistry and reputation. I told him to enjoy the cake with his staff. Then came the band. For young men who were supposed to play Frank Sinatra covers all night. The wedding's off, boys, I told the lead singer. Take the night off. The check has already cleared. He was so shocked he just said, okay thanks, and hung up. The photographer. The limousine company. The stationer who had printed the ridiculously expensive invitations. One by one I called them all. Each call was like snipping a wire. With each cancellation I felt a piece of my old self, the compliant, self-sacrificing, invisible mother, fall away. I was taking back control. This wasn't their dream wedding anymore. It was my money, my life, and now my decision. The final call was to the minister. He was a kind, elderly man who had known our family for years. This one was harder. Reverend Michael, I said, my voice a little softer. It's Carol Peterson. Carol. I was just reviewing my notes for the ceremony. I'm so looking forward to it. I'm afraid there won't be a ceremony, Reverend, I said quietly. The wedding has been cancelled due to irreconcilable differences. He was quiet for a long moment. Oh, Carol, he finally said, his voice full of genuine sorrow. I am so sorry to hear that. Is there anything I can do? No, Reverend. But thank you for your kindness. After I hung up, the kitchen was silent again. The sun was streaming through the window. The list of vendors lay on the table, every single one of them crossed out. I had completely and systematically dismantled an $80,000 wedding in less than an hour. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a very long time. It was power. My power. But my work wasn't done. There was one final piece of business. I took a piece of my best stationery, the kind I saved for special occasions, and a pen. My hand didn't shake as I began to write. I kept the note short and to the point. There was no room for sentiment, no space for anger. Just the cold, hard facts. I wrote, Michael, since my presence as an embarrassing waitress would ruin your perfect day, I have decided not to spoil it for you. The wedding has been cancelled. All the deposits paid for by my life's work are forfeited. I wish you the life you clearly feel you deserve. Your mother, Carol. I didn't sign it with love. That word felt like a lie now. I folded the note neatly, slipped it into an envelope and wrote Michael on the front. I propped it up against the sugar bowl on the kitchen table, right where he'd see it when he came down for breakfast. Then I made myself a cup of tea and went to sit on the back porch, waiting for the storm to break. It didn't take long. Around 9 a.m., I heard footsteps on the stairs. Michael whistling a cheerful tune. The sound grated on my nerves. I heard him enter the kitchen, the clink of a coffee mug, the refrigerator door opening and closing. Then silence. A dead, heavy silence that stretched for what felt like an eternity. It was broken by a strangled cry. Oh my God. Then Tiffany's voice, sharp and demanding from upstairs. Mikey? What is it? Is the coffee ready? Get down here, he choked out. Now. I heard her clattering down the stairs, complaining. What's the big deal? I need my latte before the makeup artist gets here. Her voice cut off abruptly. I imagined the scene. The two of them standing in my sunny kitchen, staring at the crisp white envelope that held the ruins of their perfect day. There was a rustle of paper, then a shriek. Not of pain but of pure undiluted rage. It was Tiffany. What is this? What did she do? The back door flew open with such force it slammed against the side of the house. Michael stood there, his face as white as a sheet, the note trembling in his hand. Tiffany was right behind him, her face a mask of furious disbelief. Her perfectly manicured facade had cracked, revealing the ugly reality beneath. "Mom," Michael stammered, his eyes wide with panic. "What is this? This is a joke, right? A sick joke." I took a slow sip of my tea before I answered. I looked from his terrified face to Tiffany's contorted one. "Does it look like I'm joking, Michael? You can't do this." Tiffany shrieked, pushing past him. Her voice was shrill. "The guests are on their way. My parents are already at their hotel. You've ruined everything." "No, dear," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You have it wrong. I haven't ruined anything. I've simply stopped paying for it." "That was our money," she spat, her eyes narrowing. "You gave it to us." I placed my teacup down with a deliberate click. I stood up, and for the first time I think they saw that I wasn't just some little old lady. I was the woman who had funded their entire fantasy, and I was pulling the plug. "Let me be very clear," I said, looking directly at Tiffany, but speaking to them both. "That was my money. It was the money I earned over 50 years of serving greasy eggs to strangers. It was the money from the sale of the land my husband and I were supposed to retire on. It was a gift given out of love. But I will not pay to be insulted. I will not fund my own humiliation. And I certainly will not be erased from my own son's wedding so that your high and mighty parents won't be offended by my calloused hands." Michael just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He had never heard me speak like this. Tiffany, however, found her voice. "You are a crazy, bitter old woman," she screamed. "You'll pay for this. I swear to God, you will pay for this." I almost smiled. The irony was just too rich. "Oh, honey," I said, shaking my head slowly. "I already have. I've been paying for years." They thought this was the worst I could do, canceling their precious party. They thought the fight was about a single day. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was that their nightmare was only just beginning. The days that followed were a blur of angry phone calls and slammed doors. Michael came over, sometimes pleading, sometimes yelling. Tiffany sent a barrage of vicious text messages. I ignored them all. I changed my phone number and started screening my calls. I thought, naively, that they would eventually give up and crawl back into whatever privileged hole they'd come from. But I had underestimated the depths of their greed and the influence of Tiffany's family. About a week later, a man in a suit knocked on my door. He wasn't a friendly visitor. He served me with legal papers. I took the thick envelope with a trembling hand and shut the door. My heart hammered against my ribs as I tore it open. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. They were suing me. Michael, my own son, and Tiffany were taking me to court. But it wasn't just for the money. The petition was for something far more sinister. They were seeking to have me declared mentally incompetent. They wanted the court to grant Michael power of attorney over my affairs, claiming that my erratic and destructive behavior in canceling the wedding was clear proof of advancing senile dementia. I felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. I had to sit down right there in the hallway. I read the words again, but they wouldn't make sense. Mentally incompetent. Senile dementia. Impaired judgment. This wasn't real. This couldn't be happening. My own child was trying to have me legally declared insane. Attached to the lawsuit was a sworn statement. A medical report signed by a Dr. Alan Maxwell, Tiffany's uncle. A psychiatrist from California whom I had never met, never spoken to, never even laid eyes on. The report was a work of fiction, a masterpiece of cruelty. It described me as exhibiting classic signs of cognitive decline, prone to paranoid delusions, and incapable of managing her own financial affairs. It cited the impulsive and irrational cancellation of a major family event as the primary evidence. It was all a lie. A calculated, vicious lie designed to strip me of everything I had left. They weren't just trying to get the wedding money back. They wanted it all. The house. My meager savings. My social security. They wanted to lock me away, literally and figuratively, so they could plunder what was left of my life. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it was like a physical poison seeping into my veins. This wasn't just about a spoiled bride and a spineless groom anymore. This was a calculated attack, orchestrated by a wealthy, powerful family who saw me as nothing more than a nuisance to be disposed of. The worst part was seeing Michael's name on that document. Michael Peterson, petitioner. My son. The baby I had rocked to sleep. The boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged. The young man whose future I had paid for with my own blood, sweat, and tears. He was now actively trying to strip me of my rights, my home, my very identity. He was willing to brand his own mother as crazy to get what he wanted. That night, I felt a despair so deep I thought it would swallow me whole. They were rich. They had lawyers and doctors in the family. And what did I have? I was a retired waitress with a mortgaged house and a broken heart. They had all the power. They could say anything, write anything, and people would believe them. How could I possibly fight this? For the first time I felt truly, utterly alone. I sat in the dark, the legal papers spread out on my coffee table, and I considered just giving up. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was crazy. Crazy to have ever believed that my love and sacrifice would mean anything to him. I was on the verge of losing everything, my home, my freedom, and what was left of my mind. For 2 days I barely moved. I didn't answer the phone. I didn't eat. I just sat in Frank's old armchair, the legal papers a malevolent presence on the coffee table, and let the despair wash over me. The thought of facing my own son in a courtroom, of having him testify that I was insane, was more than I could bear. They had me beat. I was ready to surrender. Then on the third morning my neighbor Eleanor, a sharp-witted widow in her 80s, knocked on my door. She held a Tupperware container with a slice of coffee cake. "You haven't been out for your walk, Carol," she said, her eyes full of concern. I was worried. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The whole sordid story came pouring out of me, punctuated by tears of rage and helplessness. I showed her the papers. She sat down at my kitchen table and read them, her lips pursed in a thin, angry line. When she was done, she slapped the papers down on the table. "Well, that's the lowest thing I've heard in all my 82 years, she declared. "And I've heard a lot. You are not giving up, Carol Peterson. You are not letting those vipers win." "But what can I do, Eleanor?" I sobbed. "They have doctors, fancy lawyers. And you have the truth," she said fiercely. "And you're about to get a lawyer of your own. A real one. Not some Beverly Hills shark." She made a phone call. An hour later I was sitting in a dusty, book-lined office downtown, across from a man named Ben Carter. He was my age, with a weathered face, a rumpled suit, and the kindest, sharpest eyes I'd ever seen. He had been a public defender for 30 years before going into private practice. He listened to my entire story without interruption, his expression unreadable. He examined the lawsuit and the fraudulent medical report, his brow furrowed in concentration. When I finished, he leaned back in his creaky chair and looked at me for a long moment. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, his voice a low rumble. "In my career I've seen a lot of ugliness. But this is a special kind of vile. This isn't a competency hearing. This is an attempted robbery, plain and simple." A tiny flicker of hope ignited in my chest. You think I have a chance?" Ben Carter smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through the clouds. "A chance? Ma'am, we're not just going to win. We're going to make them regret the day they ever thought they could pull a stunt like this." He sprang into action. He told me this wasn't about the inheritance of my assets yet, it was about protecting my rights now. His strategy was simple and brilliant. First, he filed a motion to demand an independent psychiatric evaluation, to be conducted by a court-appointed doctor at a state facility in Austin, not by some private doctor who could be bought. "We fight their lies with irrefutable facts," he said. Second, he started deposing their witnesses. He got a list of the people they planned to have testify against me. He started with the so-called expert, Dr. Alan Maxwell. He scheduled a video deposition. We were going to confront the man who had declared me insane without ever meeting me. Third, he told me to gather my own evidence. "We're going to paint a picture of who you really are, Carol," he said, using my first name for the first time. He asked me to get financial records, bank statements, anything that showed a long history of responsible and meticulous money management. He also told me to make a list of people who could be character witnesses. Friends, neighbors, former colleagues from the diner. People who knew the real me. I walked out of his office feeling like a different person. The despair was gone, replaced by a cold, righteous anger. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a fighter. They had started this war, but with Ben Carter by my side, I was damn well going to finish it. We had the truth and they had a foundation of lies. And I knew deep in my bones that we were about to cause a seismic shock that would bring their whole rotten world crashing down. The courtroom was cold and impersonal. Michael and Tiffany sat at the opposing table with their slick, expensive lawyer. Tiffany was dressed in a modest, dark suit, a pearl necklace at her throat, playing the part of the concerned, grieving daughter-in-law. Michael wouldn't look at me. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. He looked like a stranger. Their lawyer, a man named Davenport, put on a masterclass of manipulation. He called Tiffany to the stand. She wept crocodile tears, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, as she described my increasing confusion and erratic mood swings. She painted a picture of a loving couple who were simply deeply concerned for my well-being. It was a sickening performance. Then they played their trump card. The video deposition of Dr. Alan Maxwell, Tiffany's uncle. On the screen, he appeared in a lavish office, oozing professional authority. He spoke in calm, clinical tones about the classic indicators of senile dementia I had supposedly displayed. When it was Ben Carter's turn to cross-examine, he was methodical. He started simply. "Dr. Maxwell," Ben said, "in your report, you state that you conducted a thorough evaluation of Mrs. Peterson. Is that correct?" "Yes, it is," the doctor said smoothly. "And this evaluation took place on April 12th of this year, according to your sworn statement?" "That is also correct." Ben paused, then picked up a document from his table. "That's very interesting, doctor, because I have here airline records and credit card receipts showing that on April 12th, you and your wife were, in fact, on a golf vacation in Maui. Can you please explain to the court how you managed to conduct a thorough evaluation of a woman in Texas while you were teeing off in Hawaii?" A collective gasp went through the courtroom. The doctor on the screen turned pale. He stammered, he backpedaled, he talked about preliminary phone consultations, but the damage was done. His credibility was destroyed. Ben Carter had just exposed their central piece of evidence as a complete and utter fraud. Then it was my turn to take the stand. My heart was pounding, but when I looked at the judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, I felt a strange calm. Ben asked me simple questions and I told my story. I talked about the diner, about raising Michael alone after Frank's funeral. I talked about mortgaging my house to fund his college education. I didn't cry. I just stated the facts. Then Ben said, "Mrs. Peterson, why did you cancel the wedding?" I turned my head and for the first time I looked directly at Michael. His eyes finally met mine, and I saw a flicker of the little boy I once knew. "Because I overheard a conversation," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I heard my son's fiancée tell him that she was embarrassed by me, that my job as a waitress made me unworthy of being at their wedding. I heard her plot to lie and say I was sick so I wouldn't be there. And I heard my own son. I heard him agree." The courtroom was dead silent. "Your Honor," I continued, turning back to the judge. "For 37 years every decision I made was for my son. I sacrificed my own dreams, my own comfort, my own future, all for him. I gave him everything I had. But there is one thing I will not give him. I will not give him my dignity. They say I'm incompetent because I refused to pay $80,000 to be treated like dirt. They say I'm suffering from dementia because I chose self-respect over humiliation. If that is the definition of insanity, then so be it. But I believe it is the sanest decision I have ever made in my life." I finished, my voice trembling slightly at the end. I looked at Michael again. He had his head in his hands. Tiffany was staring at me, her face a mask of pure hatred. She knew they had lost. The judge looked down at the fraudulent medical report, then at Tiffany, then at me. She didn't even need to recess. She picked up her gavel, her expression one of utter disgust. The sound of that gavel striking the wood was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of truth, the sound of justice, the sound of my own liberation. "Case dismissed," the judge announced, her voice ringing with finality. But she didn't stop there. She looked directly at Michael and Tiffany, her eyes blazing with contempt. "Furthermore," she said, "I am referring this matter to the State Bar Association regarding Mr. Davenport's conduct, and to the California Medical Board regarding the perjurious testimony of Dr. Alan Maxwell. This court will not be used as a tool for elder abuse and financial exploitation. What the two of you have done to this woman, to your own mother," she said, locking eyes with Michael, "is not just shameful, it is morally bankrupt. Now get out of my courtroom." They practically fled, Tiffany dragging a shell-shocked Michael behind her. I felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees. Ben put a steadying hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Carol," he whispered. I had one. But as I watched my son disappear through the courtroom doors without a single backward glance, it felt like a hollow victory. I had saved my home and my freedom, but I had lost my child for good. The bond between us, already frayed, had been irrevocably severed in that courtroom. The story became the talk of our small town. People who had been whispering about my dementia were now praising my courage. But the whispers and the praise didn't matter. The house felt different now. Every corner held a memory that was now tainted. The kitchen where I'd kissed his scraped knees, the living room where we'd decorated Christmas trees, the garden where I'd overheard his betrayal. It was no longer a home. It was a museum of a dead relationship. I knew I couldn't stay there. A month later, a for sale sign stood in my front yard. It sold in a week. I packed up a few boxes of sentimental items, Frank's photos, a handful of Michael's childhood drawings. I couldn't bear to throw away my mother's locket. I sold or gave away everything else. It was a cleansing, a shedding of a life that no longer fit. Eleanor cried when I said goodbye. "Where will you go?" she asked. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "East. Towards the sunrise." And that's what I did. I got in my old but reliable sedan and I drove. I had no plan, no destination. For the first time in my life, I was completely untethered. I drove through Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. I saw parts of the country I'd only ever read about. And then one morning I found myself on the Florida coast. I pulled over and watched the sun come up over the Gulf of Mexico, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The salty air smelled of new beginnings. I stayed. I used a portion of the money from the house sale to buy a tiny sky blue cottage a few blocks from the beach. It was small, a little weathered, but it was all mine. No mortgage. No ghosts. Just peace. My old life, the one defined by the Sunrise Diner and endless sacrifice, was over. A new one I had never dared to imagine, was just beginning. I had left everything behind, carrying nothing but a few boxes and a broken heart that was, for the first time, open to the possibility of healing. My new life in Florida was quieter than anything I had ever known. The rhythm of my days was set by the tides, not by a diner's rush hour. I woke with the sun, made my coffee, and walked down to the beach. I'd watch the sandpipers skitter along the shoreline and feel the salty spray on my face. It felt like it was washing away the grime of my old life. One day, I visited the local animal shelter, just to look. I walked out with a scruffy one-eyed terrier mix whose time was almost up. He was old and quiet and looked as weary as I felt. I named him Frankie. He became my constant companion, my silent confidant on long walks. The people in my new town were different. They were a mix of retired fishermen, quirky artists, and snowbirds. They didn't care where I came from or what I did for a living. They accepted me as I was. A woman named Maria, who ran a small bakery, would save a warm croissant for me every morning. An old fisherman named Sal taught me how to find the best seashells after a storm. We'd sit on our porches in the evening, talking about everything and nothing. I was no longer Michael's mom or the waitress. I was just Carol. And it was enough. After I got settled, I knew there was one more piece of old business to attend to. I found a local lawyer, a woman with a kind face and a no-nonsense attitude, and I had her draw up a new will. The lawsuit had been a brutal wake-up call. I realized my son's attempt to get my money wouldn't stop with my death. I couldn't let him and that woman profit from my passing. "I want to leave everything to charity," I told the lawyer. She nodded. "Any specific one in mind?" I thought about it for a long time. What was the cause closest to my now-healed heart? The answer was simple. I want it all to go to an organization that provides grants and support for single mothers, I said. Women who are working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Women who are putting their kids through school. Women like me. Signing that new will, officially cutting Michael out of any future inheritance, was not an act of anger. It was an act of peace. It was a final declaration of my values. My life's work would not go to someone who despised it. It would go to women who would understand, truly understand the value of every single dollar. It would go towards easing the kind of burdens I had carried alone for so many years. With that final tie to the past severed, I felt truly free. My days were filled with simple joys. Frankie napping at my feet, the smell of Maria's baking bread, the satisfaction of a tomato ripening on the vine in my tiny garden. I wasn't rich. I didn't have a fancy life. But I was content. I had something far more valuable than money. I had peace. I had a community. And for the first time since Frank died, I felt like I was home. Years began to slip by, each one calmer than the last. I thought that chapter of my life, the one filled with pain and betrayal, was finally and completely closed. Until the day a letter arrived. The letter sat on my small kitchen table for a full day before I could bring myself to open it. The return address was Austin, Texas. The handwriting was unmistakably Michael's. My hand trembled slightly as I finally slit the envelope open. It wasn't curiosity I felt, but a cold, weary dread. The letter was long and rambling. He and Tiffany had gotten a divorce not long after the court case. The public humiliation had been too much for her, he wrote. She had blamed him for everything, called him weak, and left him for a wealthier man. The story didn't surprise me. He went on to say that he had lost his high-paying job. The scandal had followed him. He was working a lower-level salary job now, struggling to make ends meet. He wrote about his loneliness, his emptiness. He wrote that he finally understood what I had done for him, how much he had taken for granted. The last paragraph was the one that mattered. "Mom," he wrote, "I know I don't deserve it. I know I was a fool, a coward. I let her poison my mind. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't regret what I did. I live with that shame every single moment. I am so sorry. I'm begging you. Please, can I have a second chance? Can I just see you? Can we try to be a family again?" I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it, put it back in the envelope, and went for a long walk on the beach with Frankie. The waves crashed and receded, indifferent to the dramas of my life. A family again? What did that even mean? A family is built on a foundation of trust and respect. He had taken a sledgehammer to that foundation. Could it ever be rebuilt? I thought about the little boy who loved my chocolate chip pancakes. I thought about the young man I had been so proud of on his graduation day. And I felt a pang of a deep ancient sadness. But then I thought about the stranger in the courtroom, the man whose signature was on a document that tried to have me committed. The man who sat silent while his fiancée called me an embarrassment. That night I sat down and wrote my reply. My hand was steady this time. "Michael, I received your letter. I am not a monster. I do not rejoice in your unhappiness. I am sorry that your life has been difficult. I have spent a long time thinking about forgiveness. And I have found it in my heart to forgive you. I have to for my own peace. But you need to understand that forgiveness and reconciliation are 2 very different things. Forgiveness is something I can give myself. Reconciliation requires trust, and trust is something you destroyed beyond repair. The boy I raised, the son I loved, ceased to exist for me in that courtroom. You made your choice then, and I am making mine now. I have built a new life here. A life of peace and dignity, surrounded by people who value me for who I am, not for what I can give them. That peace is more precious to me than anything. The door to that old life is closed. It has to be. I wish you well, Michael. I truly hope you find your own peace. Carol. I mailed the letter the next morning. I never received a reply. I didn't expect one. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Some wounds, once inflicted, change the landscape forever. Sending that letter was the final act of my old life. It wasn't about punishment. It was about acceptance. The acceptance that my greatest sacrifice had also been my greatest mistake, and that the only way forward was to leave it, and him, behind for good. So here I am, 76 years old, sitting on my porch, watching the Florida sunset paint the sky with strokes of orange and purple. Frankie is snoring softly at my feet. The salty breeze feels good on my skin. My life is not what I planned. It's smaller, quieter, simpler. And it is more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. I learned a hard lesson, perhaps the hardest a parent can learn. You can give your children everything you have, but you cannot make them good people. You cannot make them grateful. And you cannot, and should not, sacrifice your own dignity on the altar of their happiness. My hands are still rough. They still bear the marks of a lifetime of hard work. But now they don't just carry plates of food for ungrateful customers. They hold a good book. They throw a ball for my dog. They tend to my small garden. They belong to me. For all of you watching, especially the women of my generation who were taught that our value lies in how much we can give to others, I want to say this. You matter. Your feelings matter. Your sacrifices deserve to be honored, not belittled. And your self-respect is not negotiable. It is the most valuable thing you will ever own. Don't let anyone take it from you. Not even the people you love the most. Sometimes the most powerful act of love is loving yourself enough to walk away from those who refuse to see your worth. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but it felt important. If any part of this resonated with you, if you've ever had to make a painful choice between your family and your own self-worth, I would be honored if you shared your thoughts in the comments below. Let's remind each other that we are not alone in these struggles. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It truly does help. Thank you again and be well.